I cannot be much. Right, I'm Joanna. I've been at Winter since 2016. Actually, Malcolm has been there longer than me. I started when he came home one day from a session cleaning and digitising glass plates to hear that they wanted somebody to research the history of the family. So that was me, and I've been there ever since. Anyway, the Winter's Lantern Slides. I've tried in the Winter's Lantern Slides, I'm trying to keep it just to what we have found at Winters. When you come, if you've hopefully been to Winters, you will see many wonderful things that have been found, but we've been unable to show you all the prints and all the glass negatives that are in the collection. This is a lantern that we found up in the top room, and it's not in very good condition, and a lot of it is missing. Magic lanterns were known as optical lanterns and were believed to have been invented in the 17th century by a Dutchman. They used an artificial light source and lenses to project an image onto a screen or wall. The early light sources were candles, later oil lamps, gas, and finally electricity. And if you look carefully at this one, you can see the gas tap on the corner, on the side, and then it's been taken through. But it has been altered, as you can see, to electricity. Oh, you do. By 1910, lanterns were pretty exclusively electric, and they were the forerunners of slides, and projectors were a hugely popular way of showing photographic images. They worked like a camera in reverse, shining a light out through a glass plate slide. The earliest slides were hand-painted on glass, and you are going to see some of those, and encased in a wooden frame. British slides measured 3.25 inches square. The American ones were 3.25 by 4 inches. Picture slides were made by the creation of a master drawing, photographing it, and then hand-colouring it. Photographic slides were made by modifying a glass plate negative into a positive by printing the negative onto a glass plate. Subjects used for slides were many and varied, and they have become collector's items. A search on eBay showed slides relating to travel, fairy tales, views, history, stories with texts, and moving slides. If it could be drawn or photographed, it seems to have been made into a slide. Stories were often fairy tales. Faithless Nellie Gray was a story in rhyme about a young woman and her soldier boyfriend. Bible stories were a popular subject, and there is a series of slides produced by the London Missionary Society showing missionary work in Africa. And in one of these, David Livingstone is using a magic lantern. I mean, I presume he carried it with him across Africa. Moving slides were made by sliding two images together, often bizarre subjects like a man swallowing a rat. Slides could be made at home by buying transfer sheets and sets of coloured inks and crayons, and companies such as Millikins and Lawley, who made some of the slides you're going to see, sold such materials and ready-made, as well as ready-made sets of slides. Magic lantern shows became hugely popular, and slides could be bought or hired out along with a printed commentary. Mr. Lomas of Derby, advertising in the Bulmer's Directory of 1895, hired out 50 slides for 3 and 6, and he also made slides to order. Shows were advertised and reported in newspapers of the time, and the following is a selection from the Derby Daily Telegraph. Magic Lantern Slides by Miss Wilkins. 1892 Derby Photographic Society meeting, Brittany. Slides and lectures sent by Mr. Dresser of Bexley Hill in Kent. Again, 1893, the Derby Photographic Society were advertising lantern slides every evening. 1902, Councillor Wilkins gave an illustrated talk on Old Derby at the Temperance Hall, using lantern slides. 1905, the Midland Railway lantern slides were available from the superintendent of the Midland Railway. And 1912, this is interesting in view of the fact that Mr. Winter himself ended up in Canada. G&A Pegg and Amos Wright, local agents for emigration steamship companies, showed slides of Canada, and a Canadian government lecturer attended. Institutions such as the Derby Natural History Society and the Derbyshire Archaeological Society also regularly used lantern slides at their meetings. The magic lantern itself and slides were easily available to the general public, and Mr. Winter sold them as well as other optical items. He himself won an award at the Chicago World Fair in 1893 for lantern slides. Unfortunately, the newspaper does not mention the subject matter. However, one of Winter's images, the first pipe, which exhibited in 1889 in Derby and Cardiff, was later produced as lantern slides. It is actually a group of 3 images of a young man's first attempt at smoking. Copies of the 3 images as lantern slides are in the collection of Brett Payne, and I have seen them. But they don't belong to Winter's. Right, number 3. Sorry, I should have done it. Of the 3 sets in the Winter collection, 2 are commercial and supplied by dealers and presumably sold by Winters, and so are part of a set put together at the Midland Road premises. Box 1, where's the thing? I'll have it. Sorry, I'm new to this. Box 1, labelled Livingstone and Stanley, shows scenes of David Livingstone and Henry Stanley in Africa in the 1870s. These are not the slides that were referred to earlier with the picture of the lantern slide in it. There are 13 scenes which are circular, mounted in numbered wooden slides, as you can see. On the slides are the numbers 1, 2 and 3. They're numbered up to 13, and they've slipped. Unfortunately, the glass has slipped in the slides, and that's why they are not square. When you see the whole set in a few minutes, we have Malcolm's reorientated for me. The remaining 4 are photographs of Livingstone and Stanley, and 2 scenes of Henry Stanley's meeting with David Livingstone, the famous one, Dr. Livingstone, I presume, which took place in 1871, and an incident from a later situation in Africa. The latter 2 pictures have been cut from a page of the graphic, which is with the coloured slides in the box. The heading on the magazine cutting refers to the late Sir Henry Morton Stanley, who died in 1906. The etchings from which the slides were made being the work of Balliol Salmon, an artist and illustrator. Box number 2 is labelled Slides India, of lantern slides entitled Route to India, and it was the Edward Prince of Wales' visit to India in 1875-6. There are 65 square slides of the tour, showing maps, photographs and drawings. Each one has a number and a printed description. And they're quite traditional. They're formed with the image and a plate of glass, which is bound together by this black tape. The bottom one is from the Winters selection, and this is the Chief of Police who was present at the visit of Queen Victoria. More about that later, I have more details. And they're in a box marked duplicates, and they're 51 lantern slides of Derby, Derbyshire scenes and portraits of prominent local people and titles, and many of these are recognisable as Winters images. Right, I'm going to start with the Winters slides, and I hope I have correctly identified the images, especially the dignitaries, and I don't mind being corrected if anybody knows more about who these people might be than I do. So we'll start with the Winters images. This is a well-known picture. It is of the Sherwood Foresters leaving for the Boer War in 1899, and it's taken at Normanton Barracks, now demolished, on the site of the Foresters Park on Normanton Road. And their families and there the soldiers lining up, getting ready to march down to the Midlands station. A further picture of the same time, there the men again. This is St Werburgh's Church with the cab stand and a horse and carriage outside. The River Derwent, taken from Darley Park, looking towards the railway bridge at Chester Green. Another one of the Derby skyline, the cathedral, then All Saints Church, clearly recognisable, and the tower of the Guildhall in the distance. Another Derby river scene, River Derwent, looking towards the weir, and the long bridge, which is where the Derby Canal actually crossed the River Derwent to go to the into the where the council house now stands, which is on the left, which would have been on the left of the picture. Then Walter Winter himself used to travel widely in the East Midlands, and from looking at the pictures and some of the places he seemed to go to, I think he usually, if he was going any distance, he travelled by train, and one has to remember, of course, that most, even quite small places, had railway stations. So this first one is Ashby Castle. Melbourne Pool and the house. Chatsworth House, visited many times by Winter to photograph inside and out. He had to get a permit. It was the usual thing. He wasn't the only photographer who visited, and they gave him a permit to photograph in the grounds. But Winter was invited or summoned to Chatsworth, and there's a famous incident where he was summoned to Chatsworth to photograph the Prince of Wales, who later became Edward VII, and the date given was Sunday, and he wrote back declining, saying, "I shall be about the Lord's business," because he was a very devout churchman, and they rearranged the date. That is the story. This is also known as a postcard. It's appeared in many forms, as is this one, Haddon Hall. Haddon Hall and Chatsworth were photographed on many occasions by Walter Winter, and the images were produced as postcards, and we have many pictures of the inside of Haddon Hall as well as Chatsworth. Right, now we come to the infirmary. This is the old hospital that was built, the first hospital on the London Road site, and this is known to have been built by Henry Isaac Stevens in 1865, and it was Henry Isaac Stevens, himself a keen photographer, who is believed to have designed the Winters building, but we actually have no written proof of it, but it's commonly believed that that is the case. He was very interested in Gothic style of building, and he was also known to Walter Winter. This building, it was built in 1865, shortly before the Alexandra Rooms were built, and this was demolished in 1892 when the new Derby Infirmary was built, which later became known as the Derby Royal Infirmary, and has been demolished and is now being developed into flats. But fortunately, If you know Derby and you know London Road, you'll be delighted to hear that they have kept the two buildings with the onion towers on top. The foundation stone for that hospital was laid by Queen Victoria on the 21st of May 1891, and it was the subject of much interest in Derby, and apparently she was only in Derby, the Queen, for about 2.5 to 3 hours, and what she managed to pack into that visit is absolutely amazing. And she laid the foundation stone for the new hospital, which was built, and then this one was demolished. This occasion, the visit of Queen Victoria, is the focus of the next group of lantern slides, and titles are a feature of this. First of all, the graphic. I will talk more about titles later, but the graphic, we have got a photocopy of the page from the graphic, which was a magazine newspaper of the time, in which there is account of the visit, and it included Winter's photographs, of which this is one of them. But it appeared as a drawing. Drawings were made from the photographs. This is the mayor, Sir Alfred Haslam. He was mayor, and at the end of Queen Victoria's visit to Derby, he was knighted on the station at the end of the visit. He was founder of the Union Foundry in City Road, and he's also famous for introducing refrigerated containers, and so that they could. And it was the roast lamb at the dinner is supposed to at the dinner at Midland Hotel after the ceremony at the hospital, foundation stone laying, was supposed to have come all the way from New Zealand. That's what it says in the little guidebook that was produced, account of the visit. That's his wife, Annie. She also, a drawing taken from this photograph was also produced in the graphic. You've seen this one already. It's Mr. William Addis Delacombe, Chief Constable. During his time as Chief Constable, he reduced the length of the shifts from 10 to 8 hours. He considered 10 hours was too long for his men to walk in the streets and to do their work efficiently. This is Mr. Harry Freckleton Gadsby, the town clerk at the time of the Queen's visit. His father was town clerk before. Unfortunately, he had an early death. He was drowned fishing in the River Dove. Then we have another title, Assistant House Surgeon, Dr. Naylor. And this is Dr. Naylor. I have been helped enormously in identifying these people with Dr. Laveau, now sadly deceased, book about the Derbyshire Royal Infirmary. And apparently this was the accepted dress for medical men at the time. Then we have the house surgeon, Dr. Taylor. And this is Mr. Huff. He was a consultant. Interestingly, he was also he witnessed the death of Walter Winter's second wife, who died of TB. His name's on the death certificate. Mr. Edmonds, another doctor. These were all medical staff at the Derby Infirmary at the time. People used to like to collect lantern slides, a bit like people used to collect carte de visites of all the well-known people and put them in albums. Then there's a child. Now this could be Miss Hilda Haslam, the daughter of the mayor, or it could be Miss Hilda Paget, daughter of the chairman of the Midland Railway. One of them presented a bouquet on the station at the when the Queen arrived. But don't know which one it refers to. And again, that picture was in the graphic as well. Now the next lot of people, then pictures didn't appear in the graphic, but they do have a connection with the hospital, which makes me think that they were on the board of the hospital. They were also dignitaries in Derby, and most of them were well known to Winter. Winter himself was a politician and in the local area and on the Lit Church Board and on the council, and so he would have known a lot of these people as well as photographing them. So the first one is Sir William Evans, who was mayor and local MP for Derby. That is Sir William Harcourt. He was lawyer, a Liberal statesman, but he was also MP for Derby in the 1890s. He was Home Secretary and Chancellor of the Exchequer as well. A copy of this photograph is in the National Archives. Sir Henry Benrose, I missed one. First chairman. I've gone through this. There. Sir Francis Lee of Lee's Malleable.
You've gone on again.
Francis Lee, Lee's Malleable Castings. He introduced baseball to this country. He had his foundry in the Normanton area, and he was interested in providing recreation for his workers, and he had an area laid aside for them, and he introduced them to baseball. Eventually, of course, the ground became the baseball ground and the home of Derby County, and baseball carried on for a few years, but subsequently died a death when Derby County were at the baseball ground for many, many years before moving to Pride Park. This is Sir Henry Wilmot, VC, Colonel of the Derbyshire Volunteers. He was an alderman, an MP, and was well known to Winter. He appears as a sponsor for the fine art exhibitions that Winter produced, and has appeared on many photographs. Now, I'm told that this is Thomas Roe Senior, the father of Thomas Roe, who was Winter's big friend, and I think this was the slide entitled An Old Friend. And this is Sir Thomas Roe Jr., 3 times mayor, a member of the Lit Church local board, and a big associate of Walter Winter. So, Mr. Abraham Woodis, again a mayor, Lit Church local board representative, and Derby businessman. I believe this is Samuel Whittaker, but I can't actually.
Yes, it is, Joanne.
Is it? Thank you very much, Louisa. I hoped you'd know. And this one is Unwin Souter. He again was a mayor. He was had the mills down near where the silk mill is today, and he was also a keen cricketer. And he played in Derby Cricket Club's first match in 1870, and he played for them for a few years. This is Frank Dewsbury, the mayor. You noticed all these are wearing the Derby mayoral change. It was a tradition that Winters photographed the mayor, and this carried on right up until the 1960s, I think, more. But it seems to, I don't know if they're photographed now, and I presume they have official photographs. And I have seen, they've got them in bound books down at the council house, because I went once to look up somebody. And there they are, all are officially photographed by Walt Winters Limited. Now this is Mr. Henry Hall, I think, who, along with Keith Young, were the architects of the new hospital. The pair were eminent in hospital architecture, and they had a firm in London, but they'd designed hospitals all over the country. I haven't got a photograph of Keith Young. I think this is the Reverend Vicar of Trinity Church. Winter, that's the one on London Road. Winter was a member of the Trinity Church. He was their church warden for many, many years. I'm unsure, I don't know this one, man with a beard. Any ideas, Louisa? Do you recognise him?
It does look familiar, but I'd have to go through my research.
Yeah.
We can do that.
There's another one, the same, with him slightly different angle.
Yeah.
I'll show you.
Anything that you're unsure about, we can go through it all.
And this one as well. Don't know him. But he again looks familiar, but then I'm used to looking at these,
Yeah.
so anybody else know, please shout out. Which brings me to the titles. Now the titles have helped in two ways. First of all, identifying the images, particularly those of the hospital staff, and together with the book that I mentioned, I was able to pretty well sort them out. But they are references to magazines and newspapers, and they indicate Walter Winter's connections with the national and local newspapers, who used him as a supply of images. The graphic one you've already seen, but also there was the Illustrated London News, by permission of Black and White, the Navy and Army Illustrated, an old friend that I mentioned, and I think because they're a bit crude in some ways. I don't mean that unkindly, but I wondered if they were placeholders in the box for duplicates, so that if somebody was looking for something, they could go through and find the picture of the graphic or the name of the doctor, and the slides would be behind it, which is why the box is labelled duplicates. That's my feeling anyway, but I do think an old friend would be Thomas Rose Senior. Right, when viewing the next slides, it should be remembered that this was a time of great colonial expansion and discovery. Africa in 1870 was relatively undiscovered. The Scottish missionary David Livingstone was a hero of the time. He had been determined to discover the source of the River Nile and had gone on an expedition to Africa and become lost, in inverted commas, or not heard from. And the story is that Henry Morgan Stanley, went out to find him. The tour of India, 1875-6, about a bit later than the African slides, roused much interest, and in the absence of any news media that's available today, the lantern slide was the only way of seeing the world. The Prince of Wales was received in India by the people with great enthusiasm. Remember, this is only 18 years after the mutiny, and he got a rapturous reception. And after he came back to England, Queen Victoria assumed the title of Empress of India in 1876. Right, I have chosen to show only a selection of the India slides, but first of all, I'm going to Africa to look at the Millikins and Lawley coloured slides. And what surprised me about these when we got them out of the box were the vivid colours and how well they are preserved. So there's the first one. As you can see, it's one of the ones that have been orientated so it's the right way up. And this one's ships, presumably at the port where Stanley landed. The colours are really bright. Apparently the image was photographed or etched onto the glass, I'm not quite sure of the process, and then outlined in black and then painted in. This is a walled city with the mountains behind. Again, very vivid colours. This one's crossing the river. A camp. Again, you can see the grass huts, straw huts. The American flag on top of the tent. This is men with guns. As you can see, the natives are fleeing. Again, American flag, and I presume that's Stanley in one of the pictures. Again, I have to remember these pictures are of the time, Stanley threatening somebody with a gun. And here's Livingstone and Stanley talking together by the side of the river. David Livingstone in a canoe. Lots of birds in the background. Two canoes, one with the American flag, one with the British flag. There's nothing to say exactly which part of Africa this was. I don't know if that's a crocodile on the right-hand side or a bit of land. Meeting with an elephant. A mission building, again with the American and British flags, shaking hands with the dignitaries. Crossing the river. I mean, everything had to be carried in, you know, even when they took the lanterns, you know, they took the lantern slide. It was a bit like Eric's talk of Samuel Bourne, where he went round India with piles of equipment, that they had bearers to carry everything. Henry Stanley and two of his group. And that one is the last of the coloured ones, and then we come to the four ones from etchings. Now these are interesting because they were cut from the newspaper that was found in the box, and it's a piece of newspaper from the graphic, and the images cut from the newspaper have been made into lantern slides. So this is the famous Dr. Livingstone, I presume, and the etchings were done by Balliol Salmon, and it's the artist for the graphic in 1904. This one is a later incident where Stanley was attacked by natives when he continued with his part of the expedition, and that again is in the same box. And then we have an etching of David Livingstone. and one of Stanley. And presumably Winter bought these in to sell, added to them with the pictures taken from the graphic. They didn't get sold and put up on a shelf at W.W. Winter's, where they remained until we started getting things down again. Right, the next group is the route to India. There is the Prince of Wales, an etching of the Prince of Wales on an elephant. Now these slides are the square ones of the two pieces of glass put together, one on top of the image and bound with black. The tour by the Prince of Wales included present-day Pakistan, but of course in those days it was all India. He was accompanied by a large entourage of reporters, artists and photographers. So here he is riding an elephant. There are more etchings, but the majority of them are photographic images. And on the top of each slide there is a printed description and a number. Now from looking at the numbers, there are two sets of numbers, and I think these are two sets of Visit to India slides put together as one lot. So here's this map of India. I'm trying to do the arrow.
Yeah, but if you do that, it points there. You have to put it
Sorry,
from point.
can you?
I can't see.
No.
Where. They see where the red
Yes, I
dot
do.
is.
So yeah. Excuse me, I'm not very good.
It's on ceiling.
I can see that. He landed there, at Bombay, Mumbai now. Then he came round here. It's had time in Ceylon. Then he came up the east coast to Calcutta, then across to Delhi. Sorry, I've got a wobbly hand. And then he went up here, and then back again to Delhi, and then back to Mumbai, and then back home. He was away for about 9 months, I think. And of course he went overland from London down to Marseille, and then picked up a ship and came across down the Suez Canal, came across the Mediterranean, down the Suez Canal, and then across to India. Sorry about that. Right, this is Bombay, or Mumbai as it's now known. And there's the harbour and the ships. And there's an island near Bombay. And there's some caves there which are a UNESCO heritage site, which dates from the 5th century. And they have held a huge dinner for the Prince of Wales in these caves. I mean, apparently there were thousands of dignitaries there, and this is an etching of them, of having the dinner. The caves are famous for their carvings. This is a temple. They're all very typically Indian scenes. This picture is actually an albumen print by Bourne and Shepherd, and it was acquired by the Prince of Wales. And this image is in the Royal Collection. Snake charmers. Prince of Wales on an elephant again. A row of elephants with their mahouts. A stepwell, an actual photographic image. The water was raised by a wheel turned by a bullock. And then in the middle of the photographs, images, you get a nice printed interval 5 minutes, which I'm not going to give you, but I thought it would be appropriate to put it in here. I think it's rather nicely done, that. A lot of detail on it, with the beehives and the cottage with the lattice windows. This is Calcutta, where again he was received with huge enthusiasm. This is a building in Calcutta, very typical of the government buildings. And this is a portrait of a Nawab, which is a Hindustani word for governor and ruler. Apparently the Prince of Wales was showered with gifts, a lot of which are in the royal collection. A Raja, which is the title given to dignitaries at the time of a Raj. A Nautch girl, a dancing girl. They danced to all social classes and religions. They got a bit of name about acquired an unfortunate name in that they were associated with ladies of ill repute, but they weren't actually. They were very skilled in their dancing, and there is in one of the editions of the graphic, there is an etched picture of a Nautch girl dancing before the Prince of Wales. This is the Temple of 100 Columns. The Imambaksa Palace at Lucknow, which was the site of a Durbar, which is a sort of a coming together of all elephants and people marching and getting and people meeting and being presented to the prince. This is the Taj Mahal, and on the information on the paper it says this was photographed by Canley, W. Canley, who was the photographer from the graphic who went out with the Prince of Wales in his entourage. This is the very famous metal tower and arch. It's 90% wrought iron. It's thought to be about 1600 years old, and it doesn't rust. It's 7.2 metres high, and there's about a metre and a bit under the ground as well. This is in Delhi. This is the Wonderful Leaps diving well. There's a gentleman at the top. I don't know whether he's going to plunge in, but there were a lot of these around India. There were more in the collection which I haven't actually chosen to show. This is the Lahore railway station, and the Prince of Wales left here for Bombay, Mumbai, and the return home. So he travelled by ship, he travelled up the river from Calcutta up towards Delhi. He travelled by train and eventually back to England, by train from Delhi back to Lahore, Delhi, back to Mumbai, and then back to England. Now, interestingly, two of Walter Winter's employees, Gavin Arthur Lorry and Edith Oldmeadow, who both worked at Winters in the 1890s, early 1890s, went back to work and live in India. Gavin Lorry's father actually was a photographer in India and did a lot of the early pioneering work of photographing scenes all around India. There's a lot about it on the internet, which Louisa, you did quite a lot of research on it, didn't you? Gavin Lorry came to Winters as a, don't think as a apprentice, I think he was seeing practice at Winters. His father was the photographer in India, and he came to Winters and he was there for 2 years, from 1893 to 94. Edith Oldmeadow was born in Chester, but was also had connections with India through her father, who was a police inspector, and she came to work at Winters as one of the assistants, and they met and fell in love, and they got married, and they actually travelled out to India together, and they were married in India. Gavin was born in Bangalore in 1870, the son of the photographer Gavin Wallace Lorry. He had established a studio in Lucknow, that's right, not Calcutta, and had travelled widely in northern India and Afghanistan, and his photographs are a fascinating legacy of the buildings and people. And the younger Gavin came to Winters via Christchurch in Hampshire. They both left in July 1894, and they were married in Bombay. The families eventually returned to the UK and lived in Christchurch in the south of the country. So that is the winter lantern slides. If you want to ask me anything about the pictures, but not about how you make lantern slides, I'm not very good. I don't know an awful lot about them. I've got some interesting websites if anybody wants to look up further things. There's the magiclanternsociety.org, and there's lucavall.com, which I found very helpful in explaining all about understanding a bit more about how lantern slides were made. So thank you very much. I chose not to show all the Indian photographs because there were quite a lot of them.